Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, with Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president, and this is the Libertarian Angle, the show on the internet designed to bring you the Libertarian angle on current events. Sheldon, last week the big item in the news was the government's assassination program, and I think there's some positive things to this. I think that this is evidence that there's more and more people that are waking up. They're starting to see that America's on the wrong track. I mean, here we live under a government that is assassinating people, and of course, what's got people's attention is the government's authority to assassinate Americans. But given that we're living in this kind of society where there's torture by the government, there's indefinite military detention and assassinations, what I think is fascinating is how the values of the American people have arrived at this point where the subject even is being debated as compared to just automatically condemned. When I was a kid, never in my wildest dreams did I think that my government would ever be involved with an assassination program and a torture program. And yet there's people in this country that just not only defending it, they want it to be the new permanent norm in America. And I'm reminded of what Lyndon Johnson, who I think everybody recognizes was not a paragon of, virtue, that even he saw the wrongfulness of this when it was disclosed that the CIA was involved in an assassination program in Guatemala and Cuba and so forth. Johnson comes out and calls it a murder inc. He says that, hey, you guys are involved in murder inc. So he recognized that assassination is nothing more than murder. And to me, it's just absolutely abhorrent that we're at a point in this country where people are not only just debating it, but they're accepting it as a norm, they're advocating it as a norm. In my opinion, this is nothing this is something that our country should have absolutely nothing to do with. And it's really all rooted in this whole Cold War national security state and military-industrial complex. I think they've brought us to this low level. What do you think?
Yeah, of course, they won't call it assassination for that very reason. In fact, I heard Holder or somebody say, Attorney General Holder say that it's not assassination because assassination is illegal. So you can't. They're not going to call it assassination because that would end up giving away the conclusion they want to combat. But no, I agree with you. It's very good that this is being discussed everywhere. Rand Paul deserves a lot of credit for that, although I think as this discussion between you and me goes on, we'll probably both have some criticism to make about maybe he set the bar way too low and in a way set a trap for himself. But let's give him credit where credit's due. To spend that time, the 13 hours talking, brought it to the public's attention in a way that it had not been there before. Pundits were jumping in, even people that were not normally friendly to Rand Paul were giving him credit. The other side was talking about it and trying to defend it, which of course brings it all out in the open. That's good for us. The worst thing is for it not to be discussed. And so I take my hat off to him, despite any caveats that may be voiced in the next few minutes.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that how the different groups are coalescing here. You've got a guy like John McCain that is defending Obama, which really just confirms what we were saying the whole time during that race, that there really isn't any difference between McCain and any other Democrat. They all share the same positions on the same welfare state and the warfare state. And so all of a sudden Rand Paul, because he took a stand with this filibuster, has brought to the surface an interesting array of people that are ardently concerned about civil liberties. You've got, of course, us libertarians that, we've taken a leading role in this. And then you've got, liberals like Glenn Greenwald, who's been heroic in the liberal progressive arena, while, so many liberals have blindly supported Obama. And then you've got some conservatives in the Tea Party that are rising to the surface saying, hey, this is wrong for the president to be having the authority to assassinate people. I think it's fascinating how things are percolating, and maybe people are finally starting to wake up here, Sheldon.
No, I think that is true. McCain and Lindsey Graham, in my view, weren't so much defending Obama. That's probably something they really don't want to do. But they were defending power, and they were defending the state's autocratic power to do this, and especially the presidency, the power of the presidency to unilaterally kill people and engage in warfare without any review of any kind, including Congress, really. So, as I put on Facebook, I think it was on Facebook, I put Lindsey Graham and McCain are true patriots. They put power above party, and that's what I think was going on there. I agree with you. It's great to have this being discussed. It's great to see this fissure opening up in the Republican Party, where you have Rand Paul and a few others who are very concerned about this. Ted Cruz really tried to put it to Holder during committee hearing before a couple days before the filibuster, and really browbeat Holder because Holder wouldn't answer a straight question about whether the Constitution permits the president to order the killing of an American citizen who may be just sitting in a cafe or something like that. And Holder didn't even want to answer the question. He kept saying, well, I don't think that's appropriate. And Cruz kept saying, well, I'm not asking if you think it's appropriate. I'm asking you, is there the constitutional power to do it? And this is an interesting distinction that Obama defenders, like Chris Matthews and other people, were unwilling to acknowledge. They kept saying things like, well, Obama wouldn't do this, Obama's not doing this, and he wouldn't do this. But, of course, that's not the question that was being asked of Obama or Holder. The question was, in your view, does the Constitution permit the president to do this, any president? So it wasn't about, is Obama going to do this? They tried to make it very personal, and therefore they can take umbrage, right? Oh, that's an insult. How dare you say Obama would contemplate such a thing? That was never the issue. The issue was, do these guys, who both are supposedly authorities on the Constitution, right? Obama taught it, Holder's Attorney General. How do you see the Constitution? Does it give to the president, any president, a president 100 years from now, the power to kill an American citizen who's on American soil and not, the way they were giving hypothetical, and not engaged in any kind of imminent, activity that would harm Americans? That was the only question, and the other side didn't want to acknowledge it. And I got a kick out of Chris Matthews at one point saying, he wasn't really so bothered that Obama had this power. Well, it would bother him if Dick Cheney had the power. And yet he didn't see the point, that therefore you ought to deny it to any president, because it's a little too late when a guy you don't like is in and exercising the power. Then it's a little late to say, whoa, let's pull this power back. I mean, but these Obama people are just blind to this. And, even when they kind of concede the issue, they still don't get it.
I think that's a great point. Is that, it's one of the points that really distinguish us libertarians from conservatives, and to a certain extent liberals too, is that we always say, don't be looking at presidents in terms of whether you can trust them with this power, whether they're going to use the power wisely. That's not a free society. A free society is when they lack the power to do these kind of things. That was the whole idea of the Constitution, with limited enumerated powers, with the Bill of Rights that expressly denies the power to the government, including the president, to deprive a person of life without due process of law. And what these people are saying is, oh no, Obama's a good guy. We can trust him with the power to assassinate and the power to torture and the power to indefinitely incarcerate people. He'll apply it only against the bad guys. And essentially it's the argument that Obama himself uses. We libertarians say is, imagine that your very worst enemy, the person that you really cannot even imagine having this kind of power, think about him being in the presidency, and then decide whether you want him to have that power. And if you can't do that, then you should not relinquish that power to anyone. I think it's a great point. Part of this... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is not a new point that libertarians thought up, or you can find it throughout political, the thinking, the history of political thought. Most famously, David Hume, a contemporary and friend of Adam Smith in that great Scottish Enlightenment period, said, and this is close to a direct quote, you should pick policies on the basis that knaves will be executing the policies. That was his word. Because, there's enough knavery in people that you have to assume the worst. If you're handing somebody a power, then you have to assume you're handing it to the worst kind of person. That's the assumption you ought to make. And Adam Smith said, a similar thing. So this is not some new thing. This is not paranoia. This is not directed at Obama personally. It's just good common sense. I don't see why people don't see that.
Yeah, it's that, let's trust government as compared to what Jefferson said. Hey, let there be no more talk about confidence in public officials. That's not the way you get a free society. You have to have a system where you deny them the power to do these things. And, my reservation about some of these people that are objecting to the power to assassinate or just the power to assassinate Americans, or torture, is that they don't really see the real roots of the problem here. They seem to think that, we might be able to rein in this power of assassination, maybe limit it to Americans overseas or whatever. But the real root of this thing, Sheldon, is this whole war on terrorism paradigm. Because if you follow their logic, and we've said this ever since 9/11, if you follow the logic of government officials, then of course they have the power to torture and assassinate Americans, including on American soil. Because once we let them get away with that, calling terrorism, which is a criminal offense, we all know that. That's why they just hauled in bin Laden's son-in-law to federal court. That's why Zacarias Moussaoui was in federal court. Sympathy was in federal court. Terrorism is a federal criminal offense. But when we let them get away with that by calling terrorism an act of war or a criminal offense, that gave away everything. Because at that point they can say, well, in war, we have the right to kill the enemy. And therefore we have a right to kill any terrorist in the war on terrorism, and we don't have to answer any questions, and that's why Obama's just remaining silent on every single assassination that the CIA and the military do. He says, well, we're at war. I got a right to kill the enemy. And of course that would extend to American soil. Why wouldn't it? And I think the reason they were reluctant about being direct about that is that they were afraid of alarming the American people, where, oh my gosh, Americans say, well, we didn't know it would go this far. But that's how far this war on terrorism has gone. And that's why I think we have to continue emphasizing that this is just a charade. It's like calling the war on drugs a real war, and therefore the government's got the power to torture and assassinate drug users and drug dealers.
Right, and a revealing thing that McCain said, or it might have been Lindsey Graham, since they're sort of clones of each other, when they took to the floor the day after the filibuster and were criticizing Rand Paul. One of them said, some people I think he said the party, some people in the party just won't acknowledge that we're at war. And so they want to use that as a way of justifying the world being the battlefield, including the United States, which then gives them, all the stuff that they want and gives the presidency all that these guys wanted to have. If you call it war and call the world a battlefield and now analogize everything to two armies facing each other, obviously when two armies face each other, they're not reading Miranda rights or, doing any of that stuff. They're just shooting at each other in sort of a classical war. They want to sort of ride on the coattails of that image and say, well, we're at war, so everything you're allowed to do on a battlefield when two armies are facing each other, we're allowed to do today, which means kill everybody. Now, this brings up the caveat I alluded to a few times before. Given the very narrow hypothetical that Rand Paul and Ted Cruz were giving to Holder and Obama, in a way was set the bar way too low. And you notice when Holder finally wrote his letter to Rand Paul about the filibuster, he said, does the government have the power, does the president have the power to kill an American citizen on American soil who's not engaged in combat? Now, that's the key term here. He said, well, no. Well, great. That doesn't get us anything, because all they need to do is declare this person a combatant, an enemy combatant, and then they can kill him, apparently. They can just say, well, of course, it's not reviewable by a judge or anything, so person X is engaged in combat, therefore we can kill him. So we really didn't get anything by Holder's so-called concession. I was a little sorry that Rand Paul said, finally, we got an answer, thanks a lot. I wish he had said, well, that's not exactly the question, since you can unilaterally declare anybody a combatant, and that's not reviewable by anybody. Then we really haven't gotten any concession at all. The most they said was if they don't believe you're a combatant or any threat, they can't just randomly kill any American in America. That's all they really said. Well, no one really ever claimed they could do that. They have to declare they're a combatant first, then they can do it. Well, I'm not very relieved by that.
I totally agree with you. I think that's one of the critical points, is that the president makes the decision, and his decision is non-reviewable. No federal judges are going to get involved in this. The Congress isn't going to get involved in this. I saw somebody mocking the idea that Obama has the authority to kill some American for being critical of the government or so forth. But if that were to happen, especially in the midst of a big crisis, the point is that once Obama makes the decision that that person is an enemy combatant or a suspected terrorist and kills him, there's no second guessing. So if it is a person that's just criticized the government, there's nothing that can be done about it. There's no review of it. There's no lawsuit that can be filed for a wrongful death. There's no criminal prosecution of Obama or the CIA agent that did it. And I think that point needs to be emphasized. The president is the final judge, jury, and executioner. And his judgment is non-reviewable.
And I think it's the principle we have to pound away at. It's not Obama. It's not about Obama. And it's not that I think Obama, before he leaves office in whatever year it is, 2016, is going to kill an American on American soil or, just because of his opinion. I don't believe I don't expect that to happen. I don't think he's entertaining that. That's not the issue. The issue is this unilateral, unreviewable power to declare somebody an enemy combatant, do it secretly, and then lots of things follow from that, given this whole, the whole mechanism now of the so-called war on terror and the world being the battlefield, including the United States. So we need to depersonalize it, or else it does sound like it's just, we're worried about Obama. As we've already said before, we're worried about anybody holding that power. Power corrupts, and the corrupt are attracted to power. Somebody updated Acton's saying by saying it's the corruptible are attracted to power. So that's one reason why power corrupts. We don't want anybody having that kind of power. Nobody should have the power to be judge, jury, and executioner. And by the time it gets overseen by Congress, of course, the person's dead. And so what good does that do?
Yeah, and I think the analogy that I've used in here is appropriate, is that they could do the exact same thing in the war on drugs. Let's say that some drug dealers bring their violence over from Mexico, where, of course, 70,000 dead people in the last 6 years. They bring their violence over to the U.S. side. I mean, there would be no difference between what the U.S. government's done with the so-called war on terrorism and the war on drugs. If all of a sudden they said, well, we're going to now really declare war on drugs, and we're going after these drug dealers as enemy combatants, we have the power of assassinating them, and we don't have to answer to anybody. And in fact, Sheldon, that's exactly what the Chinese communist regime was going to do just a few weeks ago. That some drug dealers had supposedly killed a bunch of people, and the Chinese were going to use assassination as a tool to take them out. They ended up capturing them. But my point is, the principle's the same, that if we let them take a criminal offense at their option and say, well, we're going to treat some people as criminal defendants, send them into federal court, and others subject to being assassinated, then really all you've given the government is the power to assassinate people for criminal offenses without any kind of due process of law. But I also wanted to take it to a much deeper level here, and that is the whole military, empire, the military-industrial complex, the whole overseas interventionism, the whole thing that we libertarians oppose, is that a lot of these guys that are opposing the assassination don't realize that this whole terrorist problem is rooted in the fact that our government is over there. And people are essentially saying, get out of our countries, leave us alone, go home. And the U.S. government is saying, no, we have the authority to stay here, sanction, embargo, invade, occupy, kidnap, torture. We're going to stay in your country. And so you've got this huge battle taking place. which then extends over to here with the power of assassination, the power of torture. While if you were to dismantle this whole machine and bring all the troops home, there'd be no more terrorist problem for there to be assassinations and torture and so forth.
Sure, but of course that wouldn't be in the interest of the policymakers or the people who are making so much money off of it. So we can't just present them our clear, logical, sensible argument because their incentives run the other direction. We've always got to keep the incentives in mind. And yes, and speaking of doing these things, there was a story just the other day, yesterday, I think, in the Wall Street Journal about how for all those people who thought the Iraq War was over, you made a mistake because the CIA is stepping up activity in Iraq because the Al-Qaeda types are active there. But by the way, these are the same Al-Qaeda types that we helped in Libya and that we're helping in Syria. But when they're in Iraq, we're against them. So you figure that out. I'm not sure I can.
Yeah, it's just a permanent state of crises, chaos, so that everybody can be anxious and scared and frightened and say, oh, we really need the national security state to protect us from the very dangers and threats that the policies are producing. And that's why I'm saying, and it's just not enough to try to rein in the assassination power. We've got to go deeper than that. We've got to pierce through this whole ridiculous war on terrorism paradigm. But even deeper than that, we've got to take the level in this country, and that is, why do we have a Cold War national security state? Why wasn't it dismantled at the end of the Cold War? What's it doing to America? Look what it's doing in terms of lowering our moral values, our ethical values, down to a point where now Americans are defending things that are repugnant and abhorrent in any objective sense, torture and assassination. This is not what America should be all about. Hey, but in the little time we have left, I wanted to talk to you about all this hoopla about the Dow Jones hitting this record and how happy days are here with the economy, and what do you make of all this?
I guess we should be out celebrating. The Dow Jones broke the 14,000 barrier and has been above that for the last few days, and so a lot of people saying Obama's policies are working finally, slowly, but they are working, and unemployment ticked down 1/10 of a point last month, and so everything must be wonderful, except there are just a few wrinkles. The Dow Jones is not adjusted for inflation. It's never adjusted for inflation. So if you adjust it for inflation, it's really only back to its 2000 level, so it doesn't look quite so good. While the unemployment rate has ticked down 1/10 of a point, the 7.7%. The labor participation rate is still very, very dismal. It was about close to 65% before the recession. It's like around 59% now. So, which is actually a better measure than unemployment because you have a lot of quirks and anomalies regarding measuring unemployment, but the percentage of sort of working age Americans who are now working is still very, very low and has not made much of a comeback. Other things like that going on. The Fed is, of course, buying bonds like crazy. Trillions of dollars a month buying bonds and buying mortgage-backed bonds. And so that's lowering the yield from bonds, which sends people to the stock market because you don't get as much on a return on bonds these days because the government is conspiring to keep the rate down. And so people are looking for other ways to use their money. Some of it's putting into commodities, and some of it is going to the stock market. So this looks like a stock market bubble, and bubbles break. We know that. And so I would say hold off on your celebrations. Keep your party hats in the closet. Don't open the champagne yet. Keep that confetti ready, maybe for some time in the future. But I don't think the Dow hitting 14,000 is something to celebrate.
Yeah, it's the standard stuff that goes on decade after decade after decade. They have these bubbles burst, and then all they do is start the cycle again. They start expanding the money supply, printing up, getting that printing press cranked up, printing all that money up, and it's funneled into certain aspects of society. This time it looks like it's in the stock market. But when will people realize what we libertarians have been saying for decades, that this is not long-standing wealth creation? That can only come about through savings and through capital accumulation, making people more productive, increasing the standard of living in a real substantive way rather than just printing the money up to do this type of thing. Because as you point out, I think all they're doing is just inflating another bubble down the line. It's going to burst even bigger than the previous one. And I think that's why we libertarians have it right on the domestic policy too, and the economic policy is that let's create the conditions for long-term prosperity. Dismantle all these ridiculous, expensive welfare state programs. Leave people free to keep their own money. They will save it. That goes into capital accumulation. That's what raises standards of living, right, Sheldon?
Well, that's right. And, Hayek pointed out for years and wrote a lot about this in the 70s about how creating money doesn't create sustainable employment because it distorts the economy. And so you may, even if you get a temporary burst in employment, which you're not even getting, it wouldn't be sustainable because it's all based on artificially low interest rates. So Bernanke has promised to keep the rate that he targets near zero until unemployment drops to 6%. So even if he gets that, it's only going to be the result of his policies, which mean they're not sustainable. So when the bubble bursts, there'll be layoffs again and an increase in unemployment. So it can't work as a long-term real program for economic growth and prosperity. And we keep saying, why don't they see this? When are they going to learn? But it's like what I said before about the war on terror. What incentive do they have to learn? They don't. If they learned, they'd be giving up power. So what's the incentive? Normally you don't learn lessons that lead you to relinquish power. So they have a built-in disincentive to learn that. So we shouldn't be asking, when will they learn? They won't ever learn. As long as they have this power exercise.
I agree with you. I mean, really what I'm referring to is the American people, and I think that's the way we started the show. I think people are large numbers of people are starting to wake up. On the assassinations, they just sense that something's wrong morally. And I think on economics, the out-of-control spending, the debt, they're starting to see something's wrong. And I think they're going to start seeing that we libertarians are right in terms of how to produce a prosperous society where standards of living are rising in a substantive sense. Anyway, that's the show, Sheldon. Our time's up, unfortunately. Had a nice visit with you. Thanks for participating. And this is Jacob Hornberger and Sheldon Richmond on the Libertarian Angle. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.